Hello, Luis.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm okay. And you know, today, can you imagine we are already on episode 7? So I think we have to congratulate ourselves of this achievement that we keep on going. Anyhow, this is another chapter, another episode on the sublime object of ideology. We are in the middle of the book, so another reason to be happy, to keep on going. And it's well, I think we reached the point, maybe of the hard kernel of the book. I think we are in the middle of the book. We are in the 3rd chapter. That's exactly the middle chapter, and it's also the longest chapter. So I would say for our listeners and viewers, fasten seatbelts, because this will become a quite not per se difficult trip, but for sure a profound one. I think we are going to dive into a lot of jargon, which we will try to do as best as possible to explain. There is a lot of Lacanian thought in it. There is a lot of references to Jacques Lacan. I think it's one of the first times, in fact, in the book, if I remember well, that he doesn't talk so much about Marx, doesn't talk so much about Hegel, but really, this is the Lacanian chapter. It's also the chapter where he will introduce one of major Lacanian parade horses, or you would say the one of the major construction emblems of this Lacanian thought, namely the graph of desire, le graphe du désir. He uses that. It's not the pure graph of desire. With Zizek, it's never, let's say, going to authentic urtext or something. It's always already a reworking of the material. And we start, when we kick off with this chapter, we are already in the midst of things. The title itself, I would almost dare to say, is like an emblem. It's like a sort of mirror of what's going on in this chapter. And it's the title of the chapter is Che vuoi, which is Italian, and which is what it means literally, what do you want? And so this is a chapter that talks to us. It's a chapter that has a voice, apparently, and says to the listener, to the reader, what do you want? What do you want from me? And well, as Lacan also, because this is of course a quote from Lacan, this is a quote from Lacan. Lacan took it somewhere else, so it's a quote of a quote. It's very interesting. This is already saying a lot about the dramaturgy, the philosophical strategy, I think, of Zizek, starting just with this enigmatic quote that is a question that talks to us, that is in itself a sort of oracular, let's say enigmatic, mysterious, also foreign, in a foreign language, pronounced question. All that, I think, puts us already on track. And it's, you can say, on what kind of track is it putting us? Not on the royal road, to knowledge and lucidity and enlightenment, but rather on a slippery, bumpy road. I would say maybe in the Divina Commedia, when Dante gets lost in the forest and gets off from the main road, he goes into little sideways in the forest, and then meets Virgil to go down in the Inferno. I think there is something infernal here going on in this chapter. So it's a very exciting chapter. I think when we were preparing it, I remember, Luís, that we many times we were blown away by the eccentricity of the chapter, but also the incredible virtuosic sprezzatura of Zizek. The sprezzatura, it's also an Italian word that means like not showing off, but in a very cool way, in fact, without showing off, doing incredible things and well, this I was also thinking that often he's referred to as these very cliches that people call him the Elvis Presley of modern philosopher, or a pop star and so on. But I would say maybe here there is something true of that, in the sense that there is something so cool in reading Zizek in a way. It's just so yeah, when you are in this chapter, it's like that you feel that you dive into a world of philosophical excitement, in fact, and you feel also that Zizek himself is excited about what he's finding out, what he's stitching together, the homologies he finds. And I think this is something that maybe we can also try to transpose to our listeners. It's also, I think, the way you have to crack these texts, keeping a little bit the amazing counterintuitive crazy marvels that he in fact spreads for us. In fact, I think maybe this is the whole thing. I think for me, reading this is really the pleasure and the incredible marvel of the counterintuitive. In fact, I think we are bombarded in our society by so-called common sense, intuition, use your guts, listen to your body, listen to your senses. This kind of philosophy of the common sense, which is, I think, so devastating and which is ruining, in fact, what Zizek is trying to save, namely a kind of very strong dialectical and counterintuitive approach to philosophy. Just to give you the word, just to end, maybe one thing still about the title. I said already, que VUOI means what do you want? I think just to wrap up something, the explanation of what que VUOI really stands for comes only almost in the end of the chapter. So that's, again, I think we had that in previous episodes also, that you, as a reader, you get this title, you have no fucking clue what it means. Que VUOI. What do you want? What does it want from me, this title? What do I have to do with it? And then you read on and on, and you get no answer. But what's happening is a sort of weird, slow deconstruction. Like you get onto the road of deconstruction, but then Zizek is slowly deconstructing deconstruction itself, you can say. Like you feel that he somehow follows deconstruction. He says, let's think about the ideology. Let's think about all these things that we were so sure about. Let's think even about people who try to deconstruct ideology. But then slowly he starts to also show to us readers, how deconstruction of ideology is not only not enough, but it's maybe even not the right thing to do today, because it, in fact, enhances a certain status quo of thinking, a status quo of the politics and so on. And it enhances a homeostasis of thinking. And I think only already on that level, I think Zizek really remains a reader for today, even if this book is from 1989. So, I mean, it's quite a long time ago. I think we agree that it's still so relevant. Okay, just one last thing about this title, Que VUOI. This comes from Jacques Lacan. And for Jacques Lacan, of course, this stands for the fact that there is something in when everything has to when everything has been placed well in the let's say in the topology of thinking, when all meaning has been uncovered, you can say, nevertheless something is there with which we can really not identify, and that's this VUOI. And I think that we will start with another term. I think you will immediately dive into that if I'm not wrong. This idea of the quilting point, what Lacan calls the point de capiton. And I think this whole chapter is a long journey, in fact, from this idea of the quilting point. Quilting is this element of stitching meaning in a meaningful way, so that everything seems okay. The pillow that you stitch together, or the mattress, is nicely condensed and everything is clear. But slowly something gets unraveled there, and that's the whole journey from quilting point to this VUOI. And I think if as a reader or as a listener, you have somehow understood how he goes from one thing to the other, I think you have somehow more or less understood what's going on in this chapter. I don't know if you agree. And well, we will come back, of course, on all this.
Yeah, and I think it's also a chapter. Of course, the entire book is about that, but in this chapter, more than any chapter before, Zizek tries to understand a question that is still posed to him today. I'm thinking, for example, there's a recent interview between Varoufakis and Zizek. It's like an interview / debate where Varoufakis asks, well, you know, Zizek, I'm an Hegelian. I understand why you need Hegel today. I understand why for socialist projects, why Hegel is important. But then what I don't understand is, why do I need Lacan? And I think more than in any other chapter, Zizek tries to answer this question here. Like, and it's, I think you already touched upon it. It's this counterintuitive, the against the antidote to common sense that we need today, that Lacan brings to the table, and that Zizek tries to explain, tries to understand. Okay, even when we understand everything on the level of discourse, on the level of, we will talk also a bit about interpolation, as we have already in a previous episode. When everything is said and done, there's still a dimension that if you don't understand, if you miss it, then you don't really understand what's going on. And it's funny because the answer that Zizek gives to Varoufakis is one that makes no sense if you don't understand Lacan. It's a kind of tautology. So Varoufakis asks, why Lacan? And Zizek says, because in order to understand Trump, you have to understand Lacan.
You answer the question, why do I care about Lacan?
If you want to understand Trump, you should.
Of course, this means nothing if you don't understand Lacan in the first place, but if you understand Lacan, of course, it's obvious. So it's a kind of a tautology that is very common in Zizek. Zizek is the thinker of the tautology, but in a way that is very productive, and this chapter is very, very clear about that. And so,
yeah, just to say something about that, I think that recently you feel that a lot of people on the left, Marxist thinkers and so on, have somehow given up on Zizek. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons is exactly this problem, what you say now about his tautology, the fact that there is a sort of loop in his way of thinking, and there is then and there is a sort of an aspect of trying to inject this loop into thinking, like reckoning with that loop, which is very hard and which is very, let's say, it's not a pleasant conclusion that you have to think like that. That there is that in the end there is no clarity or there is no end solution and so on. And I think that this is. That what you see on the left, a lot of intellectuals they have given up on on seeing this ideological loop and falling back on some kind of what we will still come to explain, this idea of primal baptism, the idea that there is a sort of ground of originary thinking that we can count on or something, which we cannot. I think that's the message of Zizek that he takes from Lacan, that we can never count on any kind of ground on which we can build some certainties or securities for society.
And that's the challenge, no? That's how we manage to live with that.
Exactly.
And so
and it doesn't sell well, of course, today. That's the problem. It doesn't sell at all.
Exactly. And Lacan probably had the same problem when he was arguing for a return to Freud. It was also for this that he was arguing, that for even in the clinic, a type of treatment that will never offer you complete satisfaction, that will only come to the realization that we're all mad, and the only way to do it is just to embrace it, and that meaning has no fixed place. And maybe the fact that meaning has no fixed place is exactly what we need to understand the quilting point.
Yeah.
So the quilting point, or the point de capiton, is precisely this element that structures meaning, but at the same time is not primordial. And what do I mean by this? There's maybe to put it first in a more simplistic way at the level of language, the quilting point can be, for example, the period on a sentence. The thing that whenever you get there, only from this period you can make sense of what comes before. There's like an old joke that you can never interrupt a German because in German the operative verb many times comes at as the very last position of the phrase, at the very end. So you can never know what the German is going to say until he gets to the final word. Of course, this works in all directions.
This is in Dutch the same. In Dutch it's also like
this works in all languages, and it's different in different ways, of course. But there's this point of something that happens that retroactively constructs what comes before. But of course, it is difficult to see because on the act of this construction, the act itself is erased. Is that things after a point de capiton, after a quilting point, things become what they always were. And this is the first, I would say, counterintuitive aspect of this theory, is that you can only you see it, but the moment you see it, then the action of the whole structure is erased, and suddenly it looks like it was always like that. And this is, of course, a term that comes from language, and maybe now you can also explain how is this important for ideology.
Yeah, you just mentioned language. I think it's maybe important to name the guy, Ferdinand de Saussure.
Of course.
That's the guy where Lacan took this idea. And one little thing that I find really interesting is that I think it's in the third seminar of Lacan where he it's the seminar on psychosis where exactly this quilting operation is so important because it would stitch meaning, but to explain it with the concept of the Saussure, I think it's very interesting that the Saussure has shown in his writings two diagrams for this problem, and of course people probably know that in linguistics you talk about two different aspects in language. Namely, you say on the one hand you have the signifier, and on the other hand you have the signified. Signifier is the word, you can say, and signified is the meaning, what that word would stand for, and what would this word point at. Of course, as we already know, one word can mean different things and so on. So the Saussure has two diagrams. The first one is a sort of more simplistic one, looks like a cookie with two parts cut in two. One side is the signifier and the one side is the signified. And in this diagram, it looks like that for every signified, every meaning, there is a nice word that appeals to it, that addresses it, and no problem. We go from one to one, and if we say something, meaning is clear. The second, and that's the one that Lacan will put in his third seminar. The second diagram of the Saussure is much more interesting because there, and it's a beautiful diagram just visually also. It's like two kind of sort of streams that are juxtaposed or put on top of each other with the letter A and the letter B. On top is the signified. It's like a river or a flow of meanings, you can say, different meanings that flow continuously back and forth. And downstairs are the words, the signifiers. And then you see already that the Saussure has some kind of vertical needles on some points putting in, like as if he already understood that on some moments you stitch together one signifier with one signified. But this happens is almost a question of randomness, contingency, or choice, whatever. And so it's and then there is this musicologist Peter Sandy. I like what he says. It's like what he says in one of his books that Lacan was very interested in this diagram because it looks like the profile of a mattress. And of course, quilting, point de capiton, the capitonnage, or this idea, this comes from the idea of, with a needle, stitching together materials in a mattress or in a pillow that would move, and that you would fix with this quilting operation. And then the button would be then on top to hold all things together. And so this is basically the whole idea of quilting. And of course, it's also very interesting that already the idea that text is a sort of texture, the texturality and the textuality are here, let's say, getting together somehow. So that's the quilting operation. And as you explained very well, I think one of the nicest examples is indeed a sentence. You have to wait till the full stop, till the point at the end. Other explanations, there are, in fact, Lacan give, for example, what Lacan also would give as an example of the quilting or punctuation is the session, the analytic session, the analysant, the patient would say things, and then one moment the analyst would say, "That's it for today," or whatever, or "Let's stop here." And that would be often on a moment that the patient says something particular, something special, or at least that in the ears of the analyst could function as something that could quilt the session somehow. And so with this last signifier that on which the session has been stopped, the patient goes home, and let's say this last signifier overflows retroactively, as you said already before, the rest of what is all said. And so what Zizek takes up from this is that in all discourse, in all ideological discourse, there is always, in all these floating signifiers, one that takes up the position of the master, you can say. But this always happens retroactively. So how this choice happens, that's the whole mystery of it. And this is, I think, what you said also. I like that you said that this is already this counterintuitive point. It's also already one of these elements of contingency on which I think Zizek is continuously working. Like, why are things happening that they happen? And the fact that we cannot put the finger on it, and it only becomes retroactively a necessity. This is very hard politically to deal with. And I think even for intellectuals, also on the left, it's really, this is maybe what left politics would be even, namely understanding these dynamics between contingency and necessity. And that the fact that even left-wing intellectuals slip continuously back into a sort of groundness, a sort of first moment of, or let's say an essence, a signified, you can say it in somehow a hidden meaning that can be unveiled. I think that's basically the political dimension behind this chapter and behind, of course, the book. Because what is sublime object? We will already, maybe just to make it, what has this to do with the sublime object? No, I think basically it means that an object has been chosen out of the variety of contingent objects to become sublime. And why that is, that's what he's trying to explain. And that it becomes sublime is always only explained retroactively. And as you said very well, this retroactive process has been erased. It's part of this whole, let's say, ideological strategy. It happens unconscious that in the end, it looks like the moment that one signifier has been, let's say, the chosen one has been chosen as being the one that the fact that this is the thing, the branded element that we take out, that strangely enough, this is very fascinating. It is as if, as you explained very well before already, it looks as there has been some historical ground for it. And that this is just not true, that this is contingent, is in fact the ideological analysis or theory that has to be established somehow, I think.
Yes, and it's also on the basis of a small article that Zizek, I think we already mentioned it previously in one of these last episodes, that it is because of this that the only thing you can change is the past. Because if you enter these dynamics of when something happens, you have to just justify retroactively why it happens, then everything becomes necessary in a way. When the thing happens, you immediately go back to look for the reasons. Of course, if you change the reasons, then the necessity for something in the future changes. And and I was thinking now about these examples. Of course, Zizek gives a few examples. He talks about this Marlboro Man, this figure of the Western cowboy who smokes and who creates an identity around Americans, who then have to identify with this figure and realize they have always been like this. And I was thinking, of course, that there's a very clear example also in Mad Men. In the first episode of Mad Men, there's this very famous scene where there's a company, a tobacco company. They have a problem. They have, because legislation surrounding the advertising for cigarettes is being legislated against advertising it as an healthy product. So suddenly there are 6 or 7 brands who have the same problem. And the solution that Don Draper gives to them is that, okay, he asks, how do you make your cigarettes? And then, of course, he describes the entire making process, which is exactly the same as any other cigarettes. It's not different. But at some point, he says, like, we take the leaves and we toast them. And he says, there you have it. It's toasted. And then this becomes, of course, the brand. And the answer of the guy is, but every single other brand also toasts their cigarettes. They're all toasted. And he says, no, all other brands are poisonous. Yours is toasted. And suddenly, what is curious about this scene is that this guy from the company sits down and it starts repeating the phrase, it's toasted. And it looks like for him, the whole experience of smoking a cigarette changed, no? That suddenly he realizes that this quality, this thing in itself, is suddenly what occupies and what feels his imaginary surrounding the cigarette. Of course, this comes only after.
It's toasted. I get it.
What you describe now reminds me of that sometimes as children or as kids, I remember that we sometimes were surprised of the gadgets or the fetishes that adults surround them with. Like this could be like certain drinks or certain brands, and we as kids we didn't understand the passion for these things. Of course, the reason is of course because there is no reason for this passion. It's not that there is an intrinsic descriptive element of like, let's say, all these things are really good, and as a kid you discover that adults like it because of the incredible qualities of something. It is exactly this what you describe now. It's like as you need to learn to love it almost. It's like you need, so it shows also how ideology is a slow erasure of the total contingency of its structure in a way, and it becomes deep, essential, profound. And you could say that every time you hear in publicity or even in daily talk, when people talk about this was a profound experience, this was a deep thing, I went to Venice and I finally understood everything about this or Baroque or whatever, you know that there is an ideological claim to be made, because it's always a sort of how to say it? It's always this kind of quilting element that happens. It's always one thing that overflows all the contingent signifiers. Of course, in the text that we are in the chapter we discuss, in this sense, it's maybe a little bit expired that he starts with a book by Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, two very important political thinkers in the 80s, 90s, that were somehow compatriots, comrades of Zizek at that time. They would have a fallout later. So he refers to how also in, let's say, ideology, let's say ecology, feminism, how these things become, let's say, how they get into, how they get fueled, you can say, with meaning, and then he explains that through a certain right-wing or left-wing master signifier or quilting point. No, that could be for the left-wing class struggle, or it could be a signifier from the right. Maybe we don't have to go too much into that, but what I find interesting is that after that he takes up, and that's also a very interesting strategy of Zizek, is that he always tries to somehow think with the enemy. And I don't say that Saul Kripke in this case is like an enemy somehow, but he's a very famous analytic philosopher. It's a philosopher from a thinker from analytic philosophy. So let's say not directly the branch that Zizek is into, but there is always in Zizek's thinking an attempt to embrace or to include even what's not part of his domain, in fact, and he follows Kripke, I think, a very long way into the, so the I think almost the whole beginning of the chapter is an attempt to understand what Kripke calls the rigid designator. It's a term that even Zizekians often use, and even maybe not aware that it comes in fact from this from Kripke. And the rigid designator is a sort of quilting point, but explained from the perspective of an analytic philosophy, you could say.
And a bit essentialistic also, no?
Yeah, totally. Of course, what Zizek discovers is that the interesting thing is he makes a distinction between two ways of understanding, let's say, what we would the sublime element of a thing. The most naive way is the descriptivism attitude, no, the descriptivistic attitude. It's like just you would say a thing is what it is because of its features. You describe it, but then of course every child can make such a thing, but then these features in themselves have to be explained ad infinitum. So you never get anywhere here. So it's a sort of false infinity that is created with descriptivism. But then he takes under his arm, or as his let's say fellow comrade here, Kripke, who has what he calls an anti-descriptive attitude towards how meaning functions. Yeah, exactly. And what you said is interesting, because this essentialism is very clear in what in the way Kripke can only understand why something is what it is, and he calls that the primal baptism. And primal baptism is exactly that element that Zizek wants to deconstruct here, and that's where he parts from Kripke, and where he says, yeah, primal baptism means that something has been chosen, a signifier becomes a quilting point, because it has been induced with some kind of like a naming, you can say, a meaning that is originary or something. And I think Zizek's critique moves to this second point. I think it's even more important than this naive descriptivistic attitude, which most people, let's say, would not agree anymore with. But the critique on and then of course I think what you already showed very well is that with this Marlboro Man, he gives also other examples, Coca-Cola. It is that it's not so that Marlboro Man is just let's say an amalgam of all the things America stands for, and then this emblem is invented based on some kind of empirical let's say investigation, or some kind of statistic investigation, like most Americans would like this or that. No, it's in fact as a sort of act suddenly there, it appears, and then retroactively, as you said, America recognizes itself in this figure. And of course, I think we have talked about that also. It's what fascinates me is how art enters also the scene here. Because what is art, basically? I would almost dare to say that art is this métier almost of bedding on quilting points, on master signifiers, being able to establish idols, to find. I think in this sense you can absolutely see the link between what capitalism from the 16th, 17th century on is doing, is in fact vampirizing what artists have understood much earlier. In fact, this idea of bedding or choosing an image that would then function retroactively as a quilting point or a master signifier, as something that would say it all. And of course, I think we are already getting there. Zizek would immediately, but it's almost a naive point of view. It would be like, comment on that, like, yeah, it says it all, but nevertheless, something is always slipping away here. And it's almost like I think common man would even understand that you are made into this or that, and you get a certain name. It could be even your family name and the name of the family, and then you have no idea as an individual what that mandate of the name that you got. It's often your father would say to you, look, this is our family name, and wear this name with pride, or make our family not ashamed, or whatever. And that you as a kid, you would think, but what is this name standing for? What is this mandate that my parents give me here, or that my professor gives me, or my teacher? I think this is already in a sort of almost commonsensical notion. This is very clear how that works, in fact.
Yeah, and it's even clear for many times for people who are. This contingency is clear for people who are involved in it. I'm thinking now about, for example, sports fans. It is a weird phenomenon, no? That everyone knows that you choose your football club when you're a kid. And of course, sometimes it's you get influenced by your parents, or sometimes you go against your parents, or whatever. But it's always contingent, no? There's no essence of the club that makes you identify with it so profoundly that you have to follow that one. But nevertheless,
Exactly.
you sacrifice your time with it. The players on the field sacrifice their time also, and you pay tickets and everything that is involved in the act of creating the experience of watching a football match, for example. Then, of course, retroactively justifies the need to sacrifice those things. So it's again a tautology that you never you can never get away from it unless you stop the circle from happening. And I was thinking maybe also what we need to mention is that how fragile this quilting point is, how can quickly change and create uh, uh, other realities even. And of course, you already mentioned psychoanalysis. In psychoanalysis, this is where I think language becomes the most dangerous tool to use. No, that you tell a story that for you is completely meaningful. You are telling a story of your weekend or something very traumatic that happens to you when you're a kid, and you are telling this story, and suddenly you make a slip of tongue, a Freudian slip. You say a word that doesn't seem to belong there, and your analyst immediately points at the fact that you use that word, and suddenly, by through the relationship also with the analyst, you try to look at this action at this foreign word, and by interpreting it, all of a sudden everything that came before, the story that was so meaningful for you, suddenly changes meaning completely, and what you said works now in a different dimension almost. And I was thinking even of a musical example. We will talk later about Don Giovanni, but the opera by Mozart, Don Giovanni, also with a libretto by Lorenzo da Ponte, has a very interesting moment that can function as a quilting point. Of course, for people who don't know the story, Don Giovanni is a nobleman who is addicted to seducing women. He has a servant, Leporello, and at the beginning of the opera, he fights with, he rapes a woman, and the father of this woman tries to defend her honor, and Don Giovanni ends up killing him. And during the first act, the woman discovers who Don Giovanni was, because when she was raped, he was wearing a mask. He discovers who he really is, and that she already knew him. And at the end of the first act, there's a party in Don Giovanni's house, and where he's inviting all the guests, and this woman, Donna Anna, comes together also with their fiancé. They are wearing masks, and also another woman, Donna Elvira, was also betrayed by Don Giovanni, and Don Giovanni is singing Viva la Libertad, which for him means very clearly, let's enjoy without limits. Let's this jouir sans entrave also, that was very typical in the May 68 protests. And the guests who are wearing masks and are secretly plotting the death of Don Giovanni join him in singing Viva la Libertad, and the music here works almost as a quilting point, in the sense that for a brief moment it looks like they are on the same side. It is very curious because it looks like they are both, or the five of them, are singing in a very moralistic way of Viva la Libertad, as if Libertad had one meaning only. And of course we know that for each of them, Libertad means a very different thing. But in this moment, they seem in accord. Of course, this changes only a moment later, when Don Giovanni tries to seduce another woman. She screams, and suddenly all the masks fall, and everyone reveals who they are and what their intentions. So you see, I think it's clear here that how fragile this quilting point can be, that if something changes in the process of meaning creation, retroactively everything becomes clear that it was never like that. And this is, I think, a quite interesting dynamic. And as I think said before, it's also what makes it so difficult to understand at the same time. Because if something erases the proof that it happened, then how do you prove it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So maybe we move on to the chapter, to what's next in the chapter. And in fact, we come on the end of the first part. In fact, maybe just to wrap up this idea, I think is that a surplus somehow is produced by this quilting, by this signifying process, in fact, and this surplus would make something sublime, in fact, would give this. I was also thinking now, we are both also interested in this work of Erich Sandner, for example. And I think also in the work of Sandner, he understands that well, that the surplus is never something that, it's never a deep ground, or it's never a sort of truthfulness that was always there, but no, it is produced by the signifier. It's in fact, weirdly enough, it's a sort of leftover element. It's something that only retroactively can be somehow discovered. And of course, someone like Alenka Zupancic, the colleague of Zizek, I think she would even stress she has a nice word. She doesn't talk. When I think Sandner, I don't know if Sandner uses that word, but she for sure uses against transcendent infinity. She has this word infinitude. That in fact there is this surplus. That the surplus that is this kind of immanent surplus of the process of quilting that would come out of everything, that this is pointing at a sort of infinity which is not a transcendent infinity, which is not the infinity that is quilted by, for example, religious discourses. They would say, yeah, there is this, nevertheless, God is one of the, I think, major, in Western culture, also one of the major important quilting points. But I think that the interesting thing is that for Zizek and also Zupancic and Sandner, the aspect of the sublime is not deconstructed. It's not that the sublime in itself is deconstructed. It is more what is deconstructed is how the effect of the sublime can exist at all, in fact. And I think this is also for this left-wing project very important, that they don't try to, maybe that's what they would blame Adorno for, or other left critical thinkers, that they in their deconstruction of ideology, that they would take away this creation of the sublime and of desire and of fascination and all these aspects that are in fact primordial to the dynamics of what's important in life in general. And I think what is so interesting in their take on that politically also is that they rescue the importance of how the sublime comes into being, in fact. And well, maybe just to, of course, we will still talk about that. One of the major examples in this chapter, it's all over the place, is anti-Semitism and racism, and the fact how that comes into being, and how anti-Semitism or racism in general always needs this kind of leftover element, no, this sublime element, which is in the case of Nazism, of course, the Jew, the figure of the Jew, which of course for Nazis themselves would have been described in negative features. I think Zizek also in one moment says it's very interesting how these features come about. They are coming from, it's a sort of weird, monstrous amalgam or construction of low class and high class negativities, like mixed all together, and that's then the feature of the Jew as a descriptive, to give somehow legitimation to this, you can say, to the stigma that the Jew got in under Nazism and afterwards. and before, by the way. It's of course it's a long tradition. But what is very interesting here is that well, what we will now do, what he is going now to do, is he now tries to give all this more or less intuitive, somehow. I think he tries to be as simple as possible. He uses analytic philosophy. He gives examples like you discussed, the Marlboro Man. We had Coca-Cola. We had all these elements of how quilting works. Now what he tries to do, I think, is going to the graph of desire of Lacan. That is a diagram, you can say, a graphical representation of how desire works and how the subject is entangled in this structure. And he will try to use that in order to, how to say, to try to understand how this quilting point is in fact already what he would call later on the objet, this object cause of desire, or that's then the title of the thing, the VUOI. But if that's all sounding still very weird for the listeners, we have talked about the symptom a lot, and I think in the end this will be the move towards the symptom, in fact, towards that thing that can never be integrated. But what I find still very interesting, and it's hard to grapple with that, is how this thing that can never be integrated is, on the one hand, something that is produced by the system. On the other hand, it is what the system needs to function in a sort of meaningful way. So it is as if every system that looks like whole and complete always needs this element that in a sort of ideological way, in a momentary way, is blocking the total closure, and only if we would have the possibility to get rid of that little thing, everything would be fulfilled or something, like we would go to total fulfillment of our desires, whatever. And of course, I think where we are going is that Zizek will show with the graph of desire of Lacan that this element has been produced by this quilting operation itself, in fact. So that the quilting operation is not just an operation of quilting signified with signifier, but also it's at the same time creating something what blocks this thing. I don't know if you have to, before we go to the graph, if you still want to say something.
I think we can go to the graph, also because I think what you are saying is quite important, is that how reality itself is shaped around something that seems not to belong there, and of course you want to take it out because you want a coherent reality. But as we have seen with the Santome, if you take it out, then you take out everything, because reality itself is this fiction constructed around something that is nonsensical and that does not seem to belong to it. And the two things cannot be just separated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also what I think, what he means with ideological anamorphosis. Because he uses that term, we were maybe not very happy with that, but I think we could see it as the continuous shifting from quilting point to objet symptom. Like there is this continuous, it's like a sort of, whatever you look from one side, it looks like a quilting point. And if you look from the other side, he uses this Hans Holbein painting with the stain in the middle. It's a famous example that Lacan used as an idea of the objet. But I think what he means is that every system needs a quilting operation and we need a quilting point. But in fact, the quilting point is also nothing else than another appearance, another maybe mirage of a symptom, in fact.
Yes. Yeah, and maybe this answers the question he asks right at the beginning of the chapter. In the end of the first section, he asks, okay, if the quilting point is the thing that organizes ideology, how then do we avoid essentialism?
Exactly.
And it's precisely through this awareness that it takes only a little shift that words mean very different things. And maybe just a final political example. I talked about Viva la Libertad in Don Giovanni. Today we have a very a very curious and at the same time scary aspect of the exact same phrase, Viva la Libertad, in Argentina, which is now led by Javier Milei. I think he identifies himself as an anarcho-capitalist or something like this. He's also a figure of the one who enjoys without limits, or at least he plays this game. And his slogan for his campaign is "Viva la libertad, carajo!" So he even adds the swear word just to show how he really enjoys, in a way, no? And it's and of course, and Zizek talks about this, and has been talking about this recently, is that it's not enough that we fight for freedom, that we realize, oh no, this is not free enough, we have to be freer and freer and freer. No, we have to change what freedom means. We have to quilt the entire structure in a different way, because for this guy, for Javier Milei, freedom means, for example, one of the measures he proposes is that poor people can sell their body parts for money, that you can sell a kidney. If you don't have enough to eat, you sell your kidney, you have money, and this is for him freedom. And of course, in a very superficial way, you can look at it as a freedom. You have a choice in the sense that you can take this. It's your choice. Of course, if we look at it closely, we see that there's not really a choice. It's, I think Mladen Dolar also uses a similar example of the guy who points a gun at the head of another person and says, your money or your life. You have a choice. You can choose your money or your life. He presents you with a choice. But if you choose your money, then you lose both. Then of course it's not a choice. But the secret here is really not, it's not enough to say this is not free enough. We have to change what freedom means, and the only way we do that is if the quilting point that structures the entire ideological reality changes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe we move to the second part of the text now.
Yes.
So that's the moment where he introduces the graph of desire, which is introduced by Lacan in the end of the 50s, I think, in the third seminar. Then he takes it up in a very famous text, which is to be found in his écrit. It's a written text by Lacan. It's called The Subversion of the Subject.
Yeah.
And the Freudian unconscious or something is the original title. And that's a really very interesting, I think even as a basic text of what Lacan is about, it's one of the best articles. And I maybe it's a moment also to promote another book that I really like, is this one by a Belgian scholar, Philippe van Houten, who was basically also my own professor, and in fact this book is about the subversion of it's a very close reading. It's called Against Adaptation. I think it's a fantastic, if you want to dive into Lacan and not going into some speculation, but really want a close reading where almost all the original Lacan is cited in the footnotes and commented by Van Houten. It's really worth it to go to use that book. I think we also profited a lot, I think, to prepare this session. And the funny thing is that my first, to talk a little bit with an anecdote, this book is based on a talk he did in Leuven in the 90s, in 98. He says it in 28 March 1998. And in fact, this was one of my first encounters with Lacan. I was there on that day when Philippe van Houten did this seminar on which he based that book. And I remember understanding nothing at all. I had to do afterwards. There was another professor of which I followed the course there, Paul Moyart, and I almost tried to parrot the things that were there in the course, because it was really sort of que voix for me, like the experience of like it. I had really no idea what it was about, and that's very interesting. I think at the same time, it's very strange. Like we are now almost 30 years further, 25, 26 years further. And I'm still somehow hooked, and that's the point de capiton. No, that's how even Lacan calls the quilting. That he says like the subject fishes with the arrow in the craft of desire is a sort of hook, a fishing hook, in fact, and you would fish your. In fact, some certain kind of like a similar thing happened with me in the 90s there, with when I was there in this seminar of Philip van Houten. And why saying that? It's in fact because I think there is in the thinking of Lacan also something of an element of attraction, of something that hooks you, and I think basically also in art and it's something that is what really is important is not so much the fact of understanding, rather it's this moment of getting hooked by something and by eventually trying to understand why. What's there that hooked you and grapple with that element or something, like this symptomatology of your own not getting rid of this so I think, and this is something I think, of course, this looks like as if form and content again flow together somehow, I think, but this is something that I appreciate in the Lacanian thought. It's not that it offers you some understanding. It only deepens your non-knowledge, you can say. It deepens your lack of ever getting to something in a profound way or something. So without getting just relativistic, I think that's
maybe the I think it's Fowler who basically says that critical thinking should not lead to answers, only to better questions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I think Lacan is 100% a way of doing that, because you will not necessarily be able to understand the entire world through Lacan.
No.
But it will make you ask questions you never thought were there to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree completely. Yeah. So let's move on with the graph. I don't know how long are we talking? You have an idea?
Around probably an hour or something.
Okay, but let's move on. Maybe no, we need to. So there are, in fact, to just give a quick overview. There are, in fact, Lacan builds this graph of desire in 4 stages. There are 4 moments. It's like every stage is a sort of reworking. It's also, again, this retroactive idea. So every stage, it's not that it's always somehow changing. It's like the next step is taking up the first one, integrating it, but also revisioning it, reworking it. And I think I said already about this first one, that is the first graph is the basic idea with 2 vectors, no? And very interesting is that the subject, or at that moment, not yet the subject, but how is the subject coming into being? It's this kind of mythical identity there that is that he in the article in the Écrit, he writes it as a delta, which hooks, which fishes, in fact, in the water of signifiers. No, this other vector that goes from one signifier to another signifier, and it makes itself represented, as Lacan very nicely said, by a signifier for another signifier. So there you get already this flow of signifiers by which the subject gets represented, in fact. So the subject is already, let's say, even if the subject, if we call it subject, it has been always already, let's say, how to say, submitted to a certain mandate, in fact. It fishes, but the fishing is something that just happens to it in order for it to receive the mandate that comes from the other, that comes from the world that exists already before it. Well, not to go too much into detail. And then he moves to the well, like Zizek uses that, in fact, to understand the quilting mechanism in the beginning. He repeats the idea of retroactivity. It's also interesting that the graph starts on the right side and moves to the left. So it's always the Freudian and the Lacanian thinking. It's a thinking that starts today but goes to yesterday, so to speak, in order to, as Zizek also says somewhere, that to make the symptom come from the future, no? But in order to do that, you need to go to the past. In fact, we have talked about that, I think, extensively before. And then he moves to the second graph. I don't know if that's okay. We already move immediately to the second graph,
I was just saying that, and it will become obvious that this delta can be thought in a way as a primal baptism.
Yeah.
That it appears that it is there.
The thing that you took from Kripke, no? That the idea of Kripke. Yeah.
The idea that you have a delta, which is the mythical intention, the subject as, let's say for now, as the one who knows what they want, and this very clear essence. And of course, the moment you enter the world of language, the symbolic order, also this line also means the symbolic order, the order of the other. The moment you try to enunciate what you need, the moment you try to speak, suddenly you recognize that you can never be fully yourself when you speak. There's always something that makes you not recognize yourself. And this is where the product of this first graph leads to, is the split subject. Is a subject that after going through language, after being born into language, realizes that they are split, that there's something that he cannot explain about himself, that language is never enough. That there's like Van Alta says, that the signifiers, there's always a signifier less.
Exactly. Yeah, and indeed, so as you said, well, that in the second graph, then this delta is immediately replaced by the split subject. And I think the second graph, as Lacan it also develops it, is just to show how, in a sort of basic strategy, the subject is, in fact, bombarded in a certain way by two identifications. One is imaginary, and the other is symbolical, and they somehow operate together. They are well. I was also saying to you, I think that what sometimes is helpful is to think also this difference between the imaginary and the symbolic identification in the line of metonymia and metaphor. The fact that and also you can think in the idea of image or mirror and window, for example, gaze. So on the one hand, you have the specular relation is the imaginary relation. It's this fact that nevertheless you imaginarily you see yourself as a whole. Interestingly, this wholeness of yourself is already obfuscated as an alienated relation of your own mirror image. You have already, but this mirror image, you perceive that as you as being there in a sort of totality. So this is a fantasy thing. Well, he calls it not fantasy, he calls it imaginary. And then there is a second element, is this symbolical identification. Like it's clearly where another appears, and of course this is something we have talked about it before. This is what he calls the unary trait. Is this that this this has to do with Freud. Freud has many examples of that. Of course, is that people in transference, they often take up some little stupid detail of the other to imitate. So, and for Lacan, this is in fact a way to get out of the imaginary identification. It's this little element that has in fact no meaning even for the other, but is somehow coming from the other, that the subject would imitate. And this could be, for example, I think, is it Dora in the case of Freud, where she has a certain cough that is the cough of her father, and she always coughs as this element that symbolically would identify her with her father. Of course, there is a whole bunch of examples that he mentions here. I just quickly go through it. So he mentions Chaplin, he mentions Bruegel. Maybe we could talk about that. It's also interesting how Chaplin for him for Zizek is an example of symbolic identification, and Bruegel, Peter Bruegel, the representation of peasants, he sees that as imaginary identification, right? I don't know. Do you think we
Yes.
should work?
Yeah, we can talk about it. Also because these two dimensions work at the same time, but one depends very clearly on the other. But just to go to your example, so just to clarify, these Chaplin movies, as they were analyzed by Eisenstein, that he says that the children in the Charlie Chaplin films are always treated with some kind of, how to say, there's something mean about them. No, it's not these pure children. The pure innocent child is someone who has some almost some perversion connected to it.
Yeah.
And of course, the answer that Zizek gives is that's because Chaplin looks at children from the level of children. That only if you look at children as a child, you realize that this ideal of purity is something that comes from outside. That you need some, again, some symbolical distance.
Yeah.
As a kid, to recognize that other children are all also mean, and that they also have this.
You know, this reminds me also of a book that and a writer that Zizek also adores, is this Hungarian writer Agota Christoph. Zizek makes always this joke, it's not Agatha Christie, no? Like Agota Christoph, she was a Hungarian writer. She wrote 3 novels which follow a trilogy. It's called the Notebook or something, the first one, and then The Lie or something. And these are fantastic. These are always about 2 kids. It's a twin, I think, two boys, and this already points at, I think, something we will talk about still later, is this ethical position that children could embody also. The fact that for Zizek, these kids, they are horrible. But they stand for Zizek this is. It's really fantastic, Agota Christoph, I have to say. It's also translated in all other languages. And it's a very... the language is stripped to the bone. And it's almost as if you hear kids talk, but not in a kind of infantile way. It's like really stripped to the essence. We did this, we did that, we killed our neighbor, we borrowed him, whatever. I mean, really horrible things happen, but always from a certain... in horrible times, it's in wartime and so on, but always these kids stand for a certain unbearable ethical position somehow. And what I see now is also that I think here, when he talks about the kids in Chaplin, I think, so symbolical identification, there is already something that connects it to, I think, a kind of, ethical position that is, for Zupancic, for Zizek, something that is like... a red thread in all his thinking, I think. So I think this is very important. Maybe we'll talk about that later on. But okay, and then the second position, the Bruegel.
yeah, the Bruegel or Dickens also. He also uses this Charles Dickens,
Yeah,
the picturing of the poor people as like there's an
an idea.
idealization there.
Yeah.
And that I think that's really the key word. The ideal ego or the imaginary identification is one that identifies with the other like almost completely, but in a sense that uh, denies the other the possibility to exist. Really, it's like
Yeah.
in Peter Bruegel also that he looks at poor people, at peasants, as if they were as if they had like this very fulfilled life, and this of course this is a trait in many even 19th century painters. And I was thinking that how to say that this imaginary identification, um, of course it's a trap, uh,
Yeah.
but it's something that nevertheless we need to go through to get to symbolic identification. And again, we come to the same problem of retroactivity. Is that and Lacan, just maybe to historicize Lacan a little bit here, that he begins the first concept he comes up in the late 30s and 40s is the imaginary. Is that this idea that you look at a mirror for the first time as a baby, and instead of all this chaos of thoughts and feelings and needs, that you see yourself for the first time as a full image, and you identify with it, and you see, okay, this is me. Of course, Lacan will later reconceptualize this thing, and he will include the other in this structure, and through the figure of the father, for example, or the mother, who has the baby in her lap and says, "This is you." And the moment the kid realizes himself as this form, as this coherent, full form, it has to come from the other. And this is what the middle vector in the first half of in the second graph means. And why it is important? Because I was also thinking about another example from sociology, that how, for example, musical taste is shaped. Why do we like the music we like? And of course, there's the theory of Bourdieu, who says that, well, we like what we like because we are culturally made to like it. We are influenced, like our likes are the likes of the other, no?
Yeah.
But at the same time, no one can really like music or like a piece of music if you are aware completely that, oh, I like this because the other likes it as well. There has to be a fiction,
Yeah.
which is very similar to the erasing of the capitonnage, of the quilting. There has to be something, a feature of your own taste that seems personal to you, that seems that's your own, for the symbolic to adhere, to become, to seem yours in a way. And this is brought curiously by another sociology theory by Antoine Nyon, who claims that taste has a personal dimension that is then shaped through exposure to a type of music, and the more you listen to it, the more you like it, and so on. Of course, the insight to have here is that one thing depends on the other. Your so-called personal, authentic taste depends always on the other. That's why this middle vector, with the small I-O, the imaginary identification or ideal ego, comes also from the other to the ego, and then splits again and goes to symbolic identification. But this I think is very important, is that you need to feel it's your own. And it's again also, I was thinking now, it's a little bit the same as a discussion we had a few episodes ago about immediacy and mediation. It's not possible that you recognize everything as mediated immediately. No,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
have first to recognize something immediately, and then you recognize how this immediacy or is in itself mediated.
Exactly.
This is, I think, what this the first or the second graph means, is how these two dimensions in a way function together by cleaning or by hiding the workings of the other.
Exactly. Yeah, and before maybe we go to the third graph, maybe just adding that this upper arrow, it goes from signifier to then it's the point de capiton is there. And you see also that there is a kind of retro arrow going from a vector going from this O is the other, the big other, to signification. It's the point de capiton. So it capitons, or how do you say it? It quilts one signifier. And then also very interesting is that he puts already there a kind of residue of this operation. No, it goes from signifier to point de capiton to big other, and then to voice, right? I don't know if we have to say something about that here, but it's interesting that Zizek also talks about, in his text, about this residue. He calls it a hypnotic voice. So this is a very debated thing, what his voice is doing there. No, what is the voice there? Is this kind of supporter of the message of the pure material remainder that would, of course, then afterwards in the third graph be taken up as an object voice, as the objet. So, but it's already here somehow. Something in the message itself, when spoken, has already this element of a residual waste element or something. No, but he calls it here. It's interesting, this idea that he calls it, that he says it's here, this objectal left over, but identified as the hypnotic voice. So I would say it's something between fetish and imaginary voice and indeed object voice. So it's like an in-between state that would then be filtered out maybe in the next graph or something. I don't know if you still want to say something about that.
That's the interesting aspect about these graphs, no, is that they work not so much, of course, they are succession. You have 4 graphs that work successfully, but at the same time, they work simultaneously.
Yeah.
So this voice, I think when Zizek talks about this hypnotic voice, is trying to detach voice from word. And of course, this is a work that Mladen Dolar does amazingly well in his book A Voice and Nothing More, that I think we will talk about someday, is that treats the voice not as the support for language itself, but as in itself a leftover that seems to belong nowhere. Because the voice is, of course, is produced by your body, it's physical, but at the same time it's not. It's something that's outside of you, that speaks to language.
I think also
not...
Mladen Dolar gives this also as a nice example how psychoanalysis is always between nature and culture operating. The voice is also something that is between nature and culture. It's part of the body, but at the same time it's a fremdkörper in our own body.
It's nature and culture, and at the same time it's neither.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think this, it's funny because for you to understand one graph, you have to go to the next one, and these 4 graphs work in a very curious way, because this voice will disappear or after, and it will come up, and we can show it as the thing that's left over, and it's what begins the third graph, or one of the aspects that we can say that this is a place where the third graph can begin, because, and it's always and the third graph is precisely about when everything is said and done, when meaning is completely explained, why is this not enough? And this, I think, the entry into the third graph is exactly the answer to the question, why Lacan? Because, and we also talked about it, about Althusser theory of interpolation. This, in a way, we can put the symbolic identification, which is the product of the second graph, as the subject of ideology in Althusser, no?
Absolutely, yeah.
That you can just maybe to summarize it for those who don't know, we already talked about it, I think, on the second or third episode, is that you live normal life, and suddenly you're on the street, and a policeman says, "Hey, you." And when you turn to the call, you are hailed, you are interpolated, you recognize that yourself as a part of an ideological structure. Not only that, you recognize that you have always been a part of this ideological structure. And this is what, after also Dollard calls it a clean cut, that you stop from your immediate experience of reality and you recognize the mediation. You recognize your place in a bigger structure. But still, there's aspects of reality that do not seem to be possible to reduce in this all. It's not a closed circuit. It's not everything works perfectly, and of course meaning is this, and then I am part of ideology, and then I can go on. And
that would work in that's exactly what would be in system theory, system sociology. That's this idea that in the end you can include everything in a holistic structure, I would say. In Lacan, this graph works as a continuous falling out of something, no? That I agree, and I think it's exactly what you describe now. It's how desire is born. Desire is born is out of this feeling that something cannot be grasped by this interpolation, something that goes beyond interpolation, right? And
yes, and it's exactly how analysis works.
Yeah,
like this, the act of something strange happens to you, and it makes you question.
Yeah,
and this questioning defies meaning, defies what you can explain.
Exactly. Yeah.
The more you explain it, the more it evades you.
And the third graph is a reworking of the second, with just adding an upper part with this question of que VUOI. Now, finally, we are there. You see, after an hour and longer talking, we finally we come to that weird. I think I have said that to you before, that these graphs have also something of a surrealistic artwork, no? They are with all these kind of sigla that are there and formulas, and then you have suddenly this.
And also the graph itself looks like a question mark, no?
Absolutely.
The third one.
Yeah, it looks like a question mark. Yeah, you see here also how Lacan is inherited of this surrealistic tradition, or the even Dadaistic tradition, where artworks have arrows and these kind of things, or maybe you could think even of arrows in the paintings of Francis Bacon or Cy Twombly or whatever, all these artists in that period who use diagrammatic structure. I also, and even there is something that reminds me of some medieval mnemonic devices that, in fact, we are capable of talking almost without preparation, so to speak, just with these graphs in front of us. They are like conversation pieces, conversation tools, in fact, in order to expand. I think in this sense, there is in Lacan some aspect that, I don't know if you know this, memory theater of Giulio Camillo in the Renaissance, where you would stand in the middle, in the place where normally the actors stand, and then you would have all these kind of objects in this arena. You would be able to talk like it's a rhetorical device, like a mnemonic device. And there is something of that in Lacan, a kind of, even maybe that's even the esoteric aspect of it, that not that it's as such esoteric, but the way that it functions as a totalizing device that exactly also includes what cannot be totalized. No, it continuously opens itself. I think later on how he talks about mathematics as is mathematics of the impossible, and the fact that mathematics is of the real. It's very interesting. It's that there is always this element of the real in these graphs or something, that they touch upon something that is impossible in a way, like that he tries to grasp with that.
Yes.
But so indeed, and it's also interesting to see that, and that is already the step further into the third graph, is that indeed you say it's a question mark, and it follows, is the parallel with the arrow of the point de capiton. So we get a parallel movement. Why is that? I think because, as Zizek then explains, of course, is that in order to somehow prematurely answer this question of que voi, which is a rhetorical question almost. It's a question that not only is asked by the subject, but comes from the other. No, it's this, what he says, this oracular voice that induces me with his voice. I think it's very nice that Lacan took that idea of que voi from an 18th century novel called Le Diable Amoureux by Jacques Cazotte, which is not known now anymore, but it's interesting. I was checking it a little bit, and in fact there is a nice engraving of this scene where this protagonist invokes the devil, and you get an engraving where you see the devil who has the shape of a camel head, and with a text balloon, like in a cartoon, saying que voi. It plays in Naples, so you could even imagine that Lacan was just not even reading that book thoroughly, but just going through the little images that he was fascinated by, and saw this image and got the idea of que voi. By the way, he says that he took it from Cazotte in the third seminar. So, but that he got there that idea of a kind of oracular, devilish voice of the other that introduces this que voi that the subject takes over as his own question to the other, like, what do you want from me? You tell me that I'm this, you tell me to be a good boy, but what do you mean with that? What do you yourself want from that? And as often happens with this problem that you cannot answer the question, a very interesting element is, of course, that the kid, the baby, the child would not know what the mother means with her appearance to the child, consoling it, but also disappearing, acting strange towards the kid. And the kid, in order to, in fact, short-circuit this problem, would imagine to be itself the object of the desire of the mother. And this is, like, I would say, almost the basic fantasy structure. So what Zizek with Lacan here is saying, and what the arrow is going of the que voi is, in order to nevertheless answer this question that is unanswerable, we need fantasy. And I think it's a fantastic, incredible insight of how fantasy appears. Fantasy is the answer, the premature answer to the unanswerable question. And that's how fantasy is at the same time something that opens up to emancipation, you can say, to the whole realm of imagery, whatever, but also there is this quilting element also in it. I think that's why it's parallel also. There is this sort of, filling in the gap, in fact. And I think, so I think Zizek says that somewhere, that in the same way desire connected to fantasy is always functioning as a sort of defense against the void of desire, the desire that is opening up to a nothing. There is no object of desire. And nevertheless, fantasy would provide an object somehow, in a phantasmatic way. I don't know. Of course, yeah.
Yes. I was just thinking, it's exactly this. It's that fantasy is the place where you place, in a way, an idealized fulfillment of your desire. And because you want to go there, it activates desire. But because it's impossible, then it's always activating desire.
Yeah.
But it's always also dangerous, because and we will see after in the fourth graph how to get away from these dynamics. But maybe just to return to Don Giovanni, which I think plays this dimension of fantasy very well, especially through the servant Leporello. So as I said before, Don Giovanni is this figure of the one who enjoys, and who, more importantly for Zizek also is a very ethical figure, in the sense that is someone who never gives way to that
Gives way to his desire, yeah.
Yeah, gives way to his desire. He never gives up on what he wants. By the end, he's faced with a choice: either he repents and he lives a normal life, so to say, or he dies. And he
think in the text that you refer to, even Zizek calls him he talks about the Jacobinism of Don Giovanni, and he sees him as a sort of anti-Casanova, where Casanova is this economizing of like just pleasurable, enjoyable, seeking pleasures, but in a kind of like neoliberal way. Yeah, typical salon figure of Don Giovanni stands for this destruction of that at the same time, so exhaustion of it, like.
Yes.
And in this sense, there is something sort of maybe some similarity to Antigone is there. But okay, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yes. Of course, the opera begins with a small aria by Leporello, singing that is basically saying that he hates to be the servant, he hates to play the guy who has to make the sentinel and just to see if someone is coming while his master is inside with a woman. He wants to be the master, so there's a little bit of a imaginary identification here already at play. But the funny thing is, Leporello is at the same time always lecturing Don Giovanni on what he does is wrong, that the life he leads is a wrong one. So there's always these two dimensions playing with Leporello. He wants to be like him, but at the same time, he knows that there's some way you are supposed to act in society. Curiously, the opera gives you the opportunities to see what would happen if the roles were reversed. Because there's a moment where Don Giovanni wants to seduce a servant, and he thinks, well, for me to seduce that woman, I have to dress as a servant, or else she won't be interested. So he asks the clothes of Leporello, and Leporello wears the clothes of Don Giovanni. Now, what happens here is that, contrary to what it would seem to Leporello in the beginning, the difference between them, it's not only a difference in class. It's not only that Don Giovanni is a master and is a rich man and is a nobleman, that's why he can seduce as many women as he can, and Leporello is a servant, so he has to live as it's supposed to. No. when they shift positions, Don Giovanni, dressed as Leporello, still manages to seduce two women, and Don Giovanni, or Leporello as Don Giovanni, almost gets killed. So it's clear that Leporello could never survive 5 minutes in the skin of Don Giovanni. And at the end, this is, I think I just found out this week, and it's quite interesting. So it's clear, just to recapitulate, the fantasy of Leporello is to be like Don Giovanni, but he has to keep some distance to it, so that, as Zizek says, there's a name for a dream that comes true. It's called a nightmare. So he has to keep some distance. That's the fantasy. He has to keep something to be desired for. But at the end, Don Giovanni dies, and there's a small postlude where each character says what they are going to do after Don Giovanni dies. And Leporello says, I'm going to look for a better master, but where? In the tavern. So it's clear that Leporello learns nothing from this. is that, okay, Don Giovanni is the figure who destroys, who shows the gratuity of the enjoyment, who shows that it's not possible to live in this dimension, that he dies immediately. And Leporello, instead of learning from this, just goes, okay, I still need to grab to my fantasy. I still need a master,
Yeah.
so-called better master. He says it superficially, but he sabotages this better master with the word, I go to look for it in a place where where are drinks and food and women. So I'm going to look for
This
the
is
same
very
guy.
interesting because it's very actual. I think if you think of this recent American series like Mad Men or The Sopranos, the protagonists there are always, why are they sticking out, and are they not the same like their companions or their helpers, their henchmen? It is because they have also in this sense a sort of ethical position, is that they somehow expose how the system really works. They are not really interested in pleasurable life, economizing things. It's like that they somehow, through their going to the end, expose something that the other figures are not doing. They are then leporellos in a way. So yeah, I think what's very interesting is that you get some kind of similar dynamics. And I would think that probably also for Zizek, this, I don't know, we could debate him. He changed, of course, also. You know that his position towards the figure of Antigone also has a lot changed, and that he has taken a step back to this a little bit, maybe not very careful calling it an ethical figure. But of course, you have to see that in the Lacanian idea of not giving up to your desire. Maybe just to add something, also Zupancic has recently a book on Antigone, Let Them Rot, it's called, where she, again, from a similar point, what her point would be that there is a desire and a not giving up on your desire of these figures that would be the best antidotum or machine de guerre, to talk with Deleuze or something, against a sort of culture of enjoying without limit. So the culture in which we live, that is the imperative of pleasure and positivity in this typical ideological sense, and that these figures stand for a sort of an antidotum to that, and an exhaustion of that, in fact. That's interesting. Maybe we have to move on, not to get stuck. There are, of course, still very interesting other examples. There is the example of all the mandate examples that he gives, the examples of people, subjects that don't know what to do with their mandate that is given in them. Very known is George Kaplan, or also really called Roger Thornhill, in North by Northwest. No, this guy that is mistakenly seen as a spy, and he doesn't know anything, and then you get almost a very nice allegory of this mandate that is put onto you, and you don't know what to do with it, and you ask this, okay. Then there is Zizek also, and that's maybe very interesting for art history, that he shows also how, for example, the Annunciation scene in Western iconology or iconography functions like that, where Mary gets the mandate of God through the angel Gabriel that she will give birth to God himself, in fact, incarnation, and how her the pathos formula that take over, how she cannot reconcile with this, that she, so you see also an evolution. He gives the example of the pre-Raphaelite Rossetti, but I think there are very interesting examples from the late Renaissance. I'm thinking of if you look at how Tiziano or Tintoretto are not just showing the Virgin Mary quietly reading, but showing her in an attitude of panic or not surprise, like negative surprise, not willing to accept this mandate. Also, that's like you see already this crack of like just not of beyond interpellation, what you also said before. But of course, this may be something else to say about that, like.
Yes, I was also thinking about this painting by Rogier van der Weyden, this Flemish painter. He
Well,
was
yeah,
Flemish, no?
somehow, well, Belgian in the interesting, yeah.
Belgium. That it's also an annunciation. But the funny thing is, it's a relatively small painting. It's now in the Louvre, and I was looking at it last time I was in Paris, and of course you have the angel. You have like the typical Annunciation picture. You have the angel on the left, Mary on the right. You have the open window, which also is a very common artifice that you have in these kind of paintings, and you have almost in the center of the painting a weird can of water with a weird shape with some things like attached to it that seems to make no sense. Like it's a weird object to have in a painting that seems so perfect otherwise. And I could imagine like a conservative priest looking at this painting saying, "Oh, what the hell is with this paint with this object here? If you please take it away so that I have the full thing." But of course, what I think he would or he would misrecognize, or he would not see, is that the scene in itself is nonsensical. Like you have an angel saying to a woman that she is going to birth a son without pain and without having sex before, and this son will all be God and man at the same time. So everything here makes no sense. But it's like all these nonsensical aspects are condensed in one object that if you take away, then
Yeah.
everything is perfect.
This is very interesting.
And this is all, yeah.
This is very interesting because you talk about the conservative priest, but you don't need to be. You can also be just an iconologist a la Panofsky, who would maybe gentrify this into a symbol. But I think what you point at is it's a line of thought that was discovered by Daniel Arras in his book on the Italian Annunciations, where, for example, he would discover that exactly the point of mystery, where these things are where the convergence point of perspective would be a pillar or a door or this object, this void, you can say, that marks this impossibility of this scene. And then, of course, you have the book of Frangelico by we have talked about this book by Didier Huberman, where he exactly sees this. He doesn't talk about this. Is interesting. What you add to this theory is that like kind of a bottle of water, a transparent, is not just a symbol. It's too easy to call it a symbol of I don't know what, of purity, of him, whatever. It's very interesting that it is somehow an empty signifier that functions as this thing that would somehow bring together this impossibility of this encounter. So that's really interesting.
Also the illusion that if you take it away, the painting is perfect and there's no mystery about
exactly
what's happening.
Yeah. Then, of course, we get other examples here. I think we cannot go into it. Antigone, we talked a little bit. There is also the films that are based on the figure of Antigone. For example, in he refers to a film by Margareta von Trotta, this one of these leading figures of Neues Deutsches Kino, the cinema of the 70s and 80s, where about Gudrun Enslin. Gudrun Enslin, who is one of these Rote Armee Fraktion people who I don't know if Zizek would stand still by that idea that she's an Antigone figure. Very interesting is that recently the son of Gudrun Enslin, Felix Enslin, has staged the play of Zizek of Antigone. Zizek wrote one play. That's 3 versions of Antigone. I have it here somewhere, but I don't know. And this play has some years ago been staged by the son of this RAF terrorist Gudrun Enslin. So and he himself is also a Lacanian theorist. So and there is even a talk on YouTube on them. But strangely enough, they avoid this question. They never talk about the mother. They never talk about this assimilation and this problematic position. But I think, of course, the whole point of ethics, we didn't really talk about that much. The whole idea of Lacanian ethics that is developed in the 7th seminar is also counterintuitive ethics. It's nepacité de son désir, is this idea of not giving way to your desire. It's not the typical commonsensical ethical position. It's a much more complex and radical ethical position. We should not go maybe into that. Let's move maybe there is also still Hamlet, which is a pity because it's absolutely the drama of failed interpellation. It's one of the major thematics that Lacan tackles in the 6th seminar. Of course, Hamlet is the modern figure of failed mandate. He sees his father, he has to kill, revenge his father, but then he cannot kill the mother. He doesn't know what to do. He fakes insanity, and so on and so on. So it's very interesting also to read Hamlet from this failed interpellation, also as a almost inaugurating act of modernity here, I think. And not getting out of that, like the hysteric position as the modern position. Then we move to the 4th. That's the final. We slowly reach the end. We move to the conclusion of the graph, which adds, of course, the element of drive, and very important, as Zizek says here also, it adds the element of drive, the element of enjoyment, but also there is the element of what Lacan calls the signifier of the barred other. And there is one nice moment that Zizek says is if Lacan is very famous for introducing the split subject, the barred subject, maybe even more important, and I think politically it's even more important because the consequence of that in the end, and that's very nicely shown in this last phase of the graph, is that not only the subject is split, but the other, the big other is also split, which means the big other is also an enigma to themselves. Like, and so you get, you get this upper part. I think we could maybe quickly still talk about that, about the fact that also he says somewhere that he takes the risk to connect that then to the symptom, which maybe brings us back to our previous episode. I don't know if that's worth to.
Yeah. This signifying of the part other, also what Zupancic calls the missing signifier, which is, and it really, I think it really comes from the impossibility of answering to the question "que voi?" No, he asked this to the other, "What do you want?" And not only you don't know what the other wants from you, the other also does not know. And this is what produces basically the signifying of the part other, is that this element of it's even weird to call it a signifier because it's it represents the impossibility of signification. So that's why I think missing signifier is a much not accurate, but
I think Van Houten in his book on Against Adaptation has some really interesting pages on that also, on the necessity of this, nevertheless, of putting a signifier there, that it's nevertheless necessary. On the other hand, it's an impossibility. But
yeah, and I was thinking also to talk a little bit about our project in early music, because I think we can frame all these different positions towards the music of the past with different moments of this graph as well. So you have the one, so you can, for example, you have a piece that you don't know how to perform because you don't know how it was performed. Maybe
and even you could even, sorry to interrupt already, but maybe it's not even, it's for every musical piece. In fact, every piece is a piece from the past. I mean, it's also for for every performance.
Exactly.
I think it's even for a theater piece, this is legitimate, I think. Oh, the only weird thing is, you will come to that, theater people seem not to have any problem with the pastness of artworks. Of the past. It's a very interesting thing. Why in theater the pastness seems not to be a barrier and a constant problem, while in music there seems to be a continuous element of recuperating something of this pastness. Right? That's what you are going to. I just wanted to clarify that.
Which is maybe because in music it's the most impossible thing to do. It's the most difficult of all the action of human actions. Maybe music is the most difficult.
But you know, this is
recover. That's why
this is interesting what you say, because ontologically
obsession.
already you can say that music is the art of the moment. No, it's vanishes. This cliche, we have talked about that many times. Hegel has seen that as one of the major points of music, its vanishing capacity. That goes back to Leonardo and so on. People were aware of that, but it's strange that exactly this vanishing element is what makes it into such an interesting art experience. And it's exactly this what seems to be not accepted. It seems as if this element, that something is always already structurally displaced in music, because you cannot repeat it, it's never the same, that this is unbearable. For there seems to be a race of people or a tribe of musicians or performers, of musicologists even, that seem not to be bearing, as you said very nicely, they seem to be overflown by anxiety, by the fact that that music as art has this moment of vanishing. And it seems and of course this vanishing element makes it into what it is. Nevertheless, well, okay, but I interrupted you. Maybe you want to still continue with.
No, because I was thinking there's basically I think there are more, of course, but I can sum up two, let's call it mainstream positions towards early music. One is probably more institutional, which is the one that cultivates this idea of we can really know how things were. Of course, this is in itself very problematic, but I think this relates more to I would say imaginary identification, no? That you project, and that you some way are sure that you really know how music was performed. And then you have the more naive way, which is I don't know. They knew, I don't know. I will just act with what I know in the present. But I would say that the really radical step to do is not this is not enough. It's not enough to say I don't know. It's not enough to recognize the subject as split, to put it in Lacanian terms. What you have to recognize is also that the other does not know. What does this mean in early music? There's a very a small article I wrote about some time ago, that it's this basic position of the early musician today is I play in the organ that Buxtehude played. I play with everything I know from the treatise, but I have to recognize that I am not Buxtehude or Bach or Palestrina or whatever the composer. I am a 21st century musician. I am not that person. So let's put this distance here. But this is not enough. What you have to say is that Buxtehude himself was not
Bach. Yeah, of course.
In the sense that Bach was not Bach, that he himself had a distance towards what he was composing.
Yeah, and I think you can even push it further, if that's pushing it further, that the music itself is just not what it is. It's like in the sense that we can just not identify the music as it was perceived in its own time. It's not enough to say, and even how it was perceived in its own time, as a Fremdkörper, as something that was anachronistic, a fossil. In the case of Bach, it's very clear that he was seen as somebody that was retarded almost, like clinging to. So it's also interesting how even how he was seen today as almost a precursor of avant-garde music, that he was an avant-gardist in his own time only because he was in the guise of someone who is in fact archaic and in his own time retarded. I think with people like Gesualdo, you have the same kind of feeling that their archaism is, weirdly enough, the cloak that they wear in order to be not of their own time, to be, let's say, untimely or something, whatever, like displaced, or I don't know.
Yes, and this is behind. We talked about it. How polyphony was such a problematic thing in its own time, that it did not fit the normal order of things.
It's also this, I think, what we said in the episodes before, but what we call modern, taking it out of its own historical or historistic framework. The idea that modernity is exactly this moment when you realize, or when that something is out of joint. The fact that something is criticized in it, that something is not recognized in its own time, is in fact pointing at the fact that you could say this is the quilting point of what is modern. Modern is this moment when, and of course these are weird quilting points. No, these are these negative quilting points. These are these quilting points who are empty, or who are, let's say, negative, who are not closing up, but maybe operate like a sort of missing signifier, you could say. Maybe that's why somehow missing signifier is on the level of the quilting point, because somehow there is something quilting there. But it quilts in a way which exhausts every possible quilting or something. I don't know if that's wrapping it up a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, because in a way it can inform, and I think in my opinion, and yours as well, I would say it should inform the historical process. Is that we organize. It's not enough that we say we will never know what happened. It's, as I said, saying that they themselves also did not know, and that you use these moments of uncanniness, of something that does not belong, of something that is apparently meaningless. If you use this as your quilting point, as the thing that you will emancipate the excluded aspect, the abject, the thing that has no sense, if you use this as your quilting point to view the past, then a whole new reality opens. It's not about knowing
I agree.
better.
It's like the ethical. It would be a sort of ethical position that you have to take. That I think also that's what he says in the end. That there are two positions, right, towards discursive, ideological, whatever, material history and so on. The one is the let's say the non-ethical, but the academic one, which is the deconstruction. And he also identifies the two operations of Freud with that, displacement and condensation, that he takes from the dream analysis of Freud. For him, this is like legitimate, but it misses this ethical element, you can say. It's okay, it can be academically, scientifically okay, but what it misses is what you say now, this extracting what Zizek calls this kernel of enjoyment, the fact that so I think that's interesting. Exactly. He gives, of course, again the example of anti-Semitism and the Jew and so on today, which immediately makes this political importance clear. But I think what is interesting in your example now of how to treat history, it shows, I think, how a political position not only plays, or an ethical political position, not only plays on the level of, let's say, commonsensical notions like anti-Semitism, racism, but even, I would almost use the term that Deleuze really liked, is this idea of microfascisms, in fact, that in fact, also as an historian, also as a performer, you have an ethical stance. You cannot just say I do early music or I perform music from a kind of point of view. You can do that, of course, of just doing it in a scientific way or an academic way or even a neoliberal subjective way. There is an ethical position, and I think everything we have been trying to work towards till now, I think, is a sort of unraveling or a sort of unveiling of this weird ethics that Lacan stands for, that Zizek stands by, I think also, and which doesn't play only on the level of macropolitics, but it has to do with the family, with cultural life, with artists working on their things, business, whatever you can think about, labor, whatever.
Yeah, it's also for me personally, because also in Portugal we are going through, also as in the rest of the world, a rise in far right presence in the parliament and in the discourse of everyday life. And of course, if the moment you have 60 fascists in your parliament, it's almost already too late. It's like, okay, now I wake up and now I will behave politically in the parliament against these things. And then this is not worth it if you don't recognize how in your micro activities, in your daily engagements with everything around you, you
Exactly.
are sustaining these structures. That's why Don Giovanni can be safeguarded or can be rescued as still an ethical hero, because for him it's non-negotiable. This mode of and he shows through this non-negotiable the gratuity and vacuity and the emptiness really of desire in its or not desire but enjoyment without limits, without a master, without exactly this jouissance sans entrave, as the French in '68 would say. But it is a challenge. Like, how do you teach this to people? Because everyone is so comfortable, and that's, I would say, why Zizek is not as important.
It's also interesting that he talks about this figure of Judas somewhere, and maybe Zizek becomes more and more this contemporary Judas figure that the left even needs in order to somehow it needs to sacrifice Zizek as a in fact it's not in order to elevate a new Christ's left-wing figure, you need to bring down the guy who really somehow points at this this what Zizek somewhere he says somewhere very nicely that the sacrifice it's a sacrifice without any fetishistic narcissism or
that he not only sacrifices his life, but he sacrifices his name. While Christ is somehow, even if he dies, you keep him as a figure of a model, and Judas is the one who knows that this sacrifice of Christ is needed, and in order for that to happen, he sacrifices himself, his reputation.
But that's interesting, because I think that's how thinking and even art should move towards. It's like if you are not ready to sacrifice on that level, I think
Nothing will change ever.
Exactly.